Karen Sykes, 41, is a dental hygienist in Columbus, Ohio. Tuesday afternoon, March 2023. She pushes a cart through her local Kroger eggs, chicken thighs, a bag of rice, 2 cans of diced tomatoes, a half-gallon of milk. The same cart she has filled every week for a decade. The total appears on the screen, $94.17. She pauses, not because she forgot her wallet. Her wallet is in her hand. She pauses because she already knows the checking account balance. Rent cleared Monday. The card goes in. Karen is not broke. She has a steady job, a clean credit history, and a household income above the national median. She is doing everything right. So why is the credit card the only thing standing between her family and going without? That question sounds personal. It is not. That same pause card in hand, checking account already spent, is happening more than 175 million times a week across the United States. Every single adult in California, Texas, and Florida combined, reaching for a card where cash used to be. Every single week. What changed was not Karen's discipline. What changed was the system around her. And the decision trail that put that card in her hand doesn't start at the Kroger register. It starts in a boardroom 18 months earlier, 3,000 miles away. This is that paper trail. To understand how Americans ended up here, you first need to understand what made grocery spending feel safe for so long. For most of the post-war era, food consumed a steadily shrinking share of American household income. Agricultural productivity rose. Refrigerated trucking reduced spoilage. Retail consolidation, Kroger, Safeway, later Walmart, squeezed margins down the entire supply chain. By the early 2000s, Americans were spending a smaller share of their paychecks on food than almost any developed nation on Earth. The grocery run was predictable. A cart full of proteins, produce, dairy, and pantry staples landed in a reliable range. You could budget for it. You didn't need to make a credit decision. Emergencies lived elsewhere. Hospital bills, car repairs, a busted furnace in February. That predictability was not luck. It was the output of a set of interlocking conditions that had held, more or less, for decades. Stable global shipping lanes, cheap fertilizer, low fuel costs, a domestic labor market where grocery chains competed hard on price and kept margins thin. Any one of those conditions breaking would have been a manageable disruption. What happened started in late 2020 was not one condition breaking. Every single one of them broke at once. And the moment they did, the grocery cart stopped being predictable. It became the most dangerous line item in the American household budget because it was the one line item that couldn't be cut. The first fracture point is traceable to a specific number. In September 2021, the average cost to ship a 40-foot container from Shanghai to Los Angeles hit $20, $816. Before the pandemic, that same container cost roughly $1, $500. That is not a price increase. That is a different world. And that number did not stay on the docks. It moved inland, into cooking oil, because the bottles needed to be manufactured somewhere and shipped somewhere. Into chicken, because the feed additives arrived by container. Into packaging, refrigeration, and the diesel that ran the distribution trucks. What food economists documented in the USDA's Producer Price Index reports through 2021 and 2022 was not a single food price shock. It was a cascade category by category, each arriving on its own timeline. Beef first, driven by slaughterhouse bottlenecks that had never fully reopened after 2020. Then cooking oils, tied to a drought in Canada that devastated the canola crop. Then eggs and avian influenza outbreak in early 2022 that culled nearly 58 million birds in less than 6 months. Then dairy. Then produce. Families adjusted. Then adjusted again. then found there was nothing left to adjust. But that was only half the story, because the prices rising at the register were not only the result of genuine supply disruptions. In the spring of 2022, something else began appearing in corporate earnings calls. Kraft Heinz reported that pricing actions, their term for price increases passed to consumers, had added 6 percentage points to revenue growth in Q1 2022. Input costs had not risen by 6 percentage points. They had risen by roughly 5%. The gap, 6 percentage points, went somewhere. Kraft Heinz reported it as profit. That gap, multiplied across dozens of food manufacturers reporting similar dynamics that same quarter, landed inside millions of grocery carts. The USDA's Food at Home Price Index rose 4% in 2022 alone, the largest single-year increase since 1979. Karen's cart didn't get more expensive because the food inside it became more valuable. It got more expensive because the system pricing it had learned that, at a certain point, people have no choice but to pay. Here is where the individual decision trail becomes visible. Wages did rise during this period. The Federal Reserve's own researchers documented it. In 2022, nominal wage growth hit its highest rate in decades. The headlines called it accurately. American workers were getting raises. But the distribution of those raises was the entire story, and the headlines missed it. Workers in professional services, finance, and technology saw real gains. Workers in retail, home healthcare, food service, and logistics, the industries concentrated at lower and lower middle incomes, received raises that looked meaningful in percentage terms and evaporated the moment they hit the checkout line. For the roughly 60 million households at the lower end of the income scale, the raise didn't exist. On paper, it did. At the register, it had already been spent before they earned it. The Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco published a working paper in early 2023 tracking this exact divergence. For households in the bottom 2 income quintiles, food price inflation had consumed more than 100% of nominal wage gains in 2022. They were mathematically worse off than before the raises. A 4% raise in the year when the grocery bill rose 11% is a pay cut with a press release attached. The gap between what the headline number said and what the household budget felt was not a perception problem. It was an arithmetic problem. And for 48 million American households, they found the same answer to that problem, the same answer the credit card industry had been quietly preparing for. Karen didn't get a grocery rewards card to carry a balance. She got it for the points. That's the point. In 2019 and 2020, major card issuers had begun aggressively promoting grocery rewards programs. Chase launched enhanced grocery multipliers on the Sapphire and Freedom lines. American Express pushed grocery spend bonuses on the Gold Card. Citi followed. The strategic rationale, documented in investor presentations from that period, was straightforward. Grocery spending is recurring, predictable, and high frequency. A customer who charges groceries weekly is more valuable than one who charges a vacation once a year. What the issuers were building, without naming it as such, was an on-ramp. Rewards marketing lowered the psychological friction of putting food on a card. By the time inflation made the card a necessity rather than a convenience, the habit was already formed in millions of households. The infrastructure was already in place. The behavior had already been normalized. That habit formation didn't show up in any bank's risk models. It showed up in the data in Q3 2022, when the numbers turned. Between Q3 2021 and Q3 2022, revolving credit card balances in the United States rose by $121 billion, enough to pay every American household's grocery bill for roughly 6 weeks. It was the steepest 12-month increase the Federal Reserve had ever recorded. TransUnion's analysts noticed something in the data. The accounts shifting from pay in full to carrying a balance, the accounts where people stopped paying off the card each month, those accounts had one thing in common: groceries. Supermarket and grocery merchant codes were appearing at elevated rates in the balance composition of accounts that had recently flipped to revolving status. Nobody published a list of what Americans were actually charging. That data lived inside the banks, but the pattern was legible enough in the aggregate. The credit card had become the American grocery budget's overflow valve. This is where the story compounds. In March 2022, the Federal Reserve began raising rates. By July 2023, the federal funds rate stood at 5.25 to 5%, the highest since 2001. The mechanism worked as intended. Inflation slowed, but the transmission lag was long, and the path of least pain was not evenly distributed. Mortgage rates are slow-moving. Car loans are fixed at origination. Credit card rates are variable, and they repriced almost immediately alongside the policy rate. The average APR on a new credit card in January 2022 was 16.3%. By January 2024, it was 21.5%. For Karen in Columbus, carrying a $600 grocery balance month to month, the math works like this. At 21% APR, the minimum payment covers almost nothing but interest. The principal barely moves. The next month, another $90 in groceries goes on the card. The month after that, the same. The balance grows faster than it can be paid down, even as the paycheck stays exactly the same. This is not a new mechanism. Revolving credit has always worked this way. What is new is the entry point. A family that once used credit cards strategically travel rewards. Cash flow timing. Paying in full every month has now been pulled into revolving debt through the act of feeding itself. The product hasn't changed. The reason for using it has changed entirely. The signals were there. They were filed under the wrong category. The personal savings rate, which had spiked to 32% during peak pandemic transfers, fell to 3.4% by mid-2023. Analysts split on interpretation. The optimists read it as confidence, consumers spending freely in a strong economy. The pessimists flagged it as a drawdown, people burning through the buffer they had built. Both were looking at the same number. Neither framing was quite right. Delinquency rates on credit cards began rising through 2023, appearing in the earnings calls of J.P. Morgan Chase, Citibank, and Capital One. The language in each case was consistent. A return to historical norms after an anomalously low default pandemic period. Manageable. Expected. Nothing structural. What the standard framework missed was the composition shift. Not just that more people were carrying balances, but that the reason they were carrying balances had changed. A delinquency rate that looks identical in 2 different years can mean completely different things depending on what generated it. A balance built on a canceled vacation is different from a balance built on chicken thighs and a bag of rice. The J.P. Morgan Chase Institute published household spending analyses showing the precise income bands where grocery credit charging had become elevated. The data existed. The interpretation defaulted to historical comparables, not to what was actually new. What was new was sitting in Karen's wallet in the form of a statement she opened on a Thursday morning in June 2023, showing a balance she did not remember accumulating. For food she had already eaten. The aggregate figure: 175 million transactions a week. $1 trillion in revolving credit card debt flattens a distribution that is deeply uneven. Upper-income households carrying and paying off balances monthly are not touched by this dynamic. They notice the grocery bill. They are not destabilized by it. The households where the balance compounds are concentrated in a specific band. Workers earning between $45,000 and $85,000 a year. Families with children. Renters in markets where housing costs moved alongside food costs. workers in industries where the wage curve lagged. For these households, the grocery balance is not the whole story. It is the visible edge of a broader compression housing, childcare, utilities, all rising simultaneously. The grocery bill is where the math finally runs out of room. You can delay a car repair. You can negotiate a medical bill onto a payment plan. You can drop a subscription. You cannot defer eating. The checkout line became the most honest balance sheet in America because it is the one expense that cannot be restructured, deferred, or appealed. And that is precisely why the balances are accumulating there. Every collapse leaves a paper trail. This one points toward a specific structural gap. Consumer credit regulation in the United States has historically been reactive. The Truth in Lending Act came after a wave of household credit abuse in the 1960s. The Card Act of 2009 followed predatory fee structures and rate manipulation exposed by the 2008 financial crisis. The rules were written after the damage was already measurable in charge-off rates and court filings. The specific mechanism at work here sits at the intersection of four separate regulatory jurisdictions: food and agriculture policy, monetary policy, wage and labor regulation, and consumer credit oversight. No single agency owns the complete picture. The USDA tracks food prices. The Federal Reserve tracks credit conditions. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau monitors household debt. None of them have the mandate or the data infrastructure to track what happens when all three systems interact at the checkout line. The CFPB's 2023 report on credit card profitability documented that interest and fee revenue had hit record highs, concentrated among issuers serving mid-market consumers. That finding is a compass bearing. It points toward the population carrying grocery balances at 21% APR. It points toward a credit product that was designed for discretionary spending and is now functioning as a food financing mechanism for working families. That is the shape of the problem the regulation has not yet caught up to. Karen's credit card statement for June 2023 showed a balance of $847. She could trace every charge. Kroger, Giant Eagle, Kroger. All of it groceries. None of it a vacation. None of it an impulse buy. Eggs, rice. The chicken thighs she bought 3 of because the sale price was the only price she could afford. She opened that statement at her kitchen table and did what millions of people in her situation do. She calculated the minimum payment, set up the autopay, and closed the laptop. Because the eggs will cost what they cost next Tuesday, and the card will be there again. The paper trail that put her in that chair runs through a container ship off the coast of Los Angeles in September 2021, through a Kraft Heinz earnings call in Q1 2022, through a Federal Reserve press conference, a wage report that told half the story, and a credit card rewards campaign designed in a marketing department in New York City 2 years before anyone needed it. No single decision caused it. Every decision contributed to it. And the thing about paper trails is that they don't end until someone decides to read them all the way through. The delinquency data is there. The merchant code data is there. The earnings reports are there. The same question that has followed every wave of household financial distress in American history is what year the rule gets written, and how many grocery runs get charged to revolving debt before it does. Money Autopsy. Every collapse leaves a paper trail. We follow it. Asterisk.